Great. So thank you all for sharing and for having the conversations with each other and for sharing that with us. It's helpful to, I was saying to Stephen and Molly, sometimes you lose the tether along the way of all of the things that have transpired. So hearing Stephen talk about that was really useful, and hearing your reflections and learnings is really useful as well. So as Molly alluded to, what we want to offer today is the House That Modernity Built, Creative Social Cartography from the Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures Collective. And like the other cartographies, this is really, it's a story. It's a story to open up conversations about things that we don't often talk about, that are difficult and challenging. I think you'll probably see that there is connections between this and the other cartographies that we've offered, in particular, the Mountain of Entitlement that we offered last time, and this. This was the first cartography that Stephen and I were introduced with the collective. We've gone through it a few times with Vanessa. There is a recording as well that we will share with all of you after the session, where Vanessa goes through the house and tells her story. And I'll say, when we asked Vanessa about this and we said we were going to share the House of Modernity, she said, find your story in it and share the House of Modernity as per your story. So our story is not going to be exactly the same as Vanessa's story. And so I'll use that as a caveat. We don't have all the experiences that Vanessa has, and we have our own unique experiences. So, Stephen.
Yeah. And I would also highlight, as we're beginning, that these cartographies were created in a process where Vanessa was and other person of the people of the collective were involved with indigenous communities, mostly in Brazil. So these stories come from us from afar, and so I invited you also to welcome them with all the respect that we need to give to those stories. So here is the House Modernity Built, and we're gonna go through it frame by frame, and we're starting with the first one on the left. So you see that the house exceeds the limits of the planet. So this is a house that was built through modernity colonialism. And this is a house that was built on the foundation of separability. So really on this idea of creating hierarchy and of hierarchies of worth that are based on the human exceptionalism, and really creating in all our economies of relational economies, emotional economies, and through all the systems and through all the stories that we inhabit and inhabit us are rooted in this idea of separability. So this foundation and this idea of human versus nature, and nature as serving to human, is the foundation that allows and yeah, that provokes the construction of this house, and that creates also hierarchies of worth that are not only between humans and the nature, but also between humans, and create different categories and really a separability of the pain of others too. And then this house has two carrying walls. There's the wall of the nation state. So the nation state that was established through nationalism and through identity, created security, belonging, and a feeling of protection, but that honestly protects only property. So nation state, as we're really looking at the historic and yeah, the historic violences that comes with it. It's really something that was created to serve property and not serve human. And we also see when we look at critical race theory that actually in true times, the different moment where we were given more human rights or labor rights were moments where those rights were profiting the maintaining of the house. So when the needs of the house are convergent, when where the needs of the humans, that's where we're allowed to have privileges. So our privileges are really dependent from the house in itself. And then there's the wall of universal reason. So this mindset and this discourse that we're used to be in, that really is about describing everything and controlling things through describing, and having also a universal story, and all being aligned through a singular story of progress, of human evolution. And what that story does, it's actually delegitimizing other stories and other ways of being, of seeing things, and that delegitimize other forms of knowledge, and that we could name also as other forms of spirituality. And when we talk about this house and this universal reason, it's something that creates a hierarchy here again of knowledge that opens the door for genocide and ecocide. So when people are not aligned with this universal reason and this main story of progress, they are identified as being behind or lacking in some way. So this is again one of the walls that make this whole house possible. And then we have the roof of global capital and capitalism, and really this idea that this is the roof that protects all the system and that makes it viable. And we can see, if we looked at time and at different places in the world, there are different roofs, but there are always a similar house when we look at stories about socialism and other eras that have been through history, and industrial revolution too was another type of roof that is meant to protect and maintain all of this. But even if they take different forms, they're all the same, nourishing the same system that is based again on nourishing this separability and distancing ourselves from the rest. And this global capital also is, through time, this new roof is also a roof. It's a place where focused on profit and generating profit. So capitalism in its latest form is about shareholders, and it's really created even layers of systems and protections to separate the worker from the owner of the profit. So there's not even the type of relationship that there was a couple of years ago, where actually factory owners were a bit accountable of what they were doing. People knew who they were, and they could form union and ask for some kind of response and accountability. But this, through time and through this building of capitalistic economy, has built really a system that really protects profit and invisibilize everything else and all the ways it controls the other parts. Anything to add to this first house,
I think the only thing to add is really that this is a shrinking planet and a growing house, and how much it is exceeding the limits of the planet. That it's the foundations are that humans are at the apex. That nation states and protection of property is what is paramount. That universal reason is really a kind of a epistemicide, a killing off of other ways of knowing, which is really the starting point for the ability to have genocides and ecocides. So these are like the foundational pieces, and that the protection of profits over people with global capitalism, and the way that capitalism has shifted to be more and more anonymous shareholders gaining wealth. That this is really the kind of foundation that we're talking about when we're talking about this house that modernity has built.
And even historically, when we talk about the nation state and how our civil rights were given, even the abolition of slavery happened where at a juncture in time where continuing slavery was becoming a risk for the system. So it was actually a shift that was so it was redesigned to continue to be in this process cycle. Yeah. So then we get to the second house, which highlights the hidden cost of this of the house. So really highlighting that the house is a house of unsustainable growth and overconsumption, and overconsumption really relates and informs all our modes of engagement and everything, our relationship and our relationship with others, with knowledge and with the environment, all are embedded in consumptive and extractive ways of being. And you can also see there are two big black arrows, so highlighting that the house is made possible by expropriation. So expropriation of the global south, expropriation of who is not allowed in the house. So really destitution, dispossession, and genocide. So highlighting that the house cannot continue and be maintained and be sustained if there are no destitution, dispossession, and genocide, because this is what has built this house, and it's impossible to have it without that. And even the cycle ending in waste disposal on the same people that we've extracted, expropriated, and killed at some point. So really, violence is the fuel that keeps us warm in the house.
Yeah, this frame is really meant to highlight the ways that the house is subsidized and maintained by those violences. And Stephen and I are zooming in from Canada, a major global miner, mining the earth, not just in our own nation state, but right around the world, and that consumption is what allows us to maintain the kind of lifestyle that we have in Canada. And so, but it's hidden, it's not known. That's not to mention the mining that we do in our own country on Indigenous lands that have been stolen. So, it's very cyclical and alive in all ways.
Yeah, I actually learned a lot about Canadian mining while I was in South America. And I learned it from people who were experiencing it and who were experiencing the violence and the destitution, the things that I could not hear about from news here. I have cousins who work in mining, but those are all things that are invisibilized. But then when I went in the global south, I was actually, I saw what my identity was associated with, and really was able to see, able that's a big word, but started to have a hint of the story that I was in and the cycles that I was in, how they were actually not true and how the costs were hidden. And here are, so in the video that we're gonna send about where Vanessa tells the story about they did a speculative exercise where they calculated the actual cost of an iPad, because there are many hidden costs and environmental costs, historical costs, and L costs to creating the iPads. So we pay 1,000, but through a speculative exercise that is not scientific at all, but really to give us an idea of this kind of dynamic, they calculated that the real price of an iPad would be $30,000. So asking the question, who pays 29 if we pay 1,000? So if everyone would be paid a fair wage, if the environmental costs were taken into account, so this would be the real price of it. So really highlighting how we're still benefiting those systems, even if sometimes we think that we're in a post-colonial state or post all of this. And then we switch to the third house. So explaining a bit more how the house is articulated within. So there are different floors in the house, and bringing back this idea of global south and global north. So you see in the attic of and the top floor of the house, it's actually where the people with who had longer financial security and privilege secure for longer. So those are people who historically who have had privilege and who are benefiting from this house. And then you have the north of south. So this is where you're gonna find a social mobility stairs. So this is where we speak about middle class. So where you have everyone engaged into getting in a better place, in a better situation of really being able to to attain this north of the north. So we're all in this kind of race and trying to rise above, even if we don't want to. This is how the system is built. And then there is the south of north, where this is the basement of the house, where you have people that are not engaged, who do not have access to the social mobility stairs, but that are actually maintaining the house. So those are the people who do the cleaning, who do the cooking. So all the people whose work is often invisibilized and not valued in our systems, but work that is actually essential and that makes the house possible, and that lets the other people be in this kind of course for security and privilege. And you see the south of the south, which talks about the communities that really receive the shit and and all our waste are being dumped on. So really, when we and those people, they when they see that things are crumbling around them, they come to knock at the house, and they're like, and some of them are asking to access the house because we've made their livelihood or their way of life impossible to sustain anymore, and we have extracted so much that they see that their only solution might be to come in the house, but at some point the house cannot sustain everyone, and we cannot keep it growing. And there are also people that don't want to join the house and have other ways of being and other ways of living, and that can't see the violence that is happening, but will choose to not join the house either.
Yeah, they're fighting for the continued way of being, knowing, and living. that, the universal reason is also really attempting to take away. And this frame really talks about that staircase of social mobility, which links to the mountain of entitlement that we brought last time, that really looks at, what is, our purpose and movement in life. It is pointing to this north of north, this penthouse, this level of privileges. And this frame is really highlighting that that's based on violences and unsustainability that people are paying the price for. The planet is paying the price, and people and other beings are paying the price for.
Yeah. And then when we get to the fourth house, we start to see the structural damage that is happening from the the different crises and the unsustainability of maintaining this for so long and not responding to the signals of things are not going well. So all our denials are keeping this house growing and extracting the planet. And we see the climate change, economic instability, cancellation of right, precarity, populism, all those things that are arising and that are also mixed with social, economic, political, mental health, and ecological crisis. And then we see that in the South, that there is violent conflict and mass enforced migration. And we see also, compared to the third house, that the planet has been inundated by the shit that we've been dumping and the waste that we've been dumping. So then in our mode of thinking, and that's something that we've been talking a lot, then comes or kind of panic, and that's where we feel we're starting to drown when we look at this house and not having other ways of thinking about it than how can we fix it, how can we expand the house, can we build another, can we have a life without the house, or can we find more planets to build more houses. So this is the kind of space that we're stuck into right now of how can we move to a different space, but we can't just abandon the house and say, well, we're all franchised from it, we don't think like that anymore, and that's done. But we need to auspice the house, we need to auspice the systems that are the house.
Yeah.
And we also need to, while doing that, learn from it. So it's not only what can we do next, but what do we learn from this house so that we can actually have some kind of healing process and learning process.
Yeah. How can we reckon with the mistakes that have gotten us here so that we can only make new mistakes in the future? Yeah. And then this is the second frame of the house that Modernity built, and we're gonna start with the houses, and we'll come back to the reasoning.
Yeah. So I just talked about are responses that, well, the responses that we know to this crumbling of the house, to fix, to expand, to build another, those are responses that are embedded in affective and relational feedback loops. So this is what we've been talking about, this kind of composting and this peeling of the onion and looking back at the stories and the cycles that we're stuck in and that you've all been talking about in your debrief from the check-in. So those three houses are linked together because modernity creates fears and harness them, then creates compensatory desires that becomes perceived entitlement. So the modernity and capitalism create a fear of scarcity that creates in us a compensatory desire for accumulation that then becomes a perceived entitlement for ownership. And then so on, with a fear of uncertainty that becomes a desire for certainty and an entitlement for control, for stability, sorry. And a fear of loss and pain that needs a desire for relief and an entitlement to denial. So all those different feedback loops that we've been talking with you for a while, and through different cartography and through even radical tenderness, which was an invitation to start looking at how those different things are in our relational feedback loops and affective ways of being, and how we can develop radars to see them and to then gesture toward a different way of being.
Yeah, how can we notice in ourselves when we're coming from a fear of uncertainty, how we're pushing towards that desire for certainty, and that really can show up for a feeling of entitlement for stability. We want this thing to feel stable and good. So that this part of this work and like interrupting that is about repatterning. But when we talk about creating stamina, it's the stamina to stay in it when we're feeling the feelings associated with this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we come back to the beginning of this series. You'll see the characters. So there's the big box, the black box with a little body. So this is Boxhead. So we present to you Boxhead, which is a kind of trickster and a friend that we've been in conversation with for a while. So Boxhead really is the embodiment of those three houses. So it's really our colonized mindset and this way of reasoning. So you'll see that in Boxhead, it's written, I think, therefore I am. I say, therefore it is. I own, therefore I rule. I lead, therefore you follow. I arbitrate, therefore you comply. I rock, therefore you suck. So all this reasoning that is based on all those many things that we've been talking about in all those different cartographies, and in this separability and this evolutionary thinking. You can see on the sides of the box allochronic. Allochronic speaks about how time and color. So how white bodies are perceived as the apex of evolution. So even without being conscious of it, and even when we don't agree with that, this is still a story that affects our sorry, I lost the word. Our psyche, sorry. And then there's logocentric. So all this attachment to universal reason, to describing, and to have things under control.
Yeah. And anthropocentric, which is again that human as the center, as the most important, as the the apex of all, separate from and to rule over, the only ones who have the ability to be rational as part of that story. It really speaks to, earlier on somebody was talking about how this is part of our DNA and how do we dismantle this as part of our DNA. These elements really speak to how colonization shapes our way of knowing, thinking, and being, and how strong and powerful it is, and how difficult it is to change, right? It's really embedded in, and there are lots of rewards that we feel for all of these elements. And so, you know, the ways that that box head shows up is really how colonization has taken over and shaped our mind and our way of thinking, knowing, and being. And the elements below box head, the erotic, aesthetic, intuitive, the ludic, the divine, the hilarious, the other than human, are ways to interrupt box heads, you know, firm, square, brick-like
Yeah.
way of being, thinking.
Yeah, because in our society where box head is the way to go, or the validated way of being, we're all reduced to knowing. So the more you know, the more worth you have. And around what Jocelyn is saying, when you dive deeper with the video of Vanessa, she speaks also about this different calibration that is even through our body, and she speaks about speculative experimentation that she has with some people in the collective, where they're actually looking at even how our endorphin or our different chemical calibrations in our bodies are even related to that, and how we find our desires for validation, for numbing pain, for having excitement, for feeling protected. All of those are attached to some different hormones, sometimes, or different signals in our bodies. So there's really a recalibration that is. Yeah, it's not just for fun that we do embodiment exercise. It's because there's a lot that we have to learn also from our bodies, and the reaction from our bodies that are also speaking about that.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the feeling of drowning, this is this comes with it's not just something that is intellectualized. It's actually when you're in situation where the usual stimulus are not calibrated the same ways, and we're not used to find comfort in those ways of being. Whereas many indigenous communities have explored and live with different calibrations, and this is why they're able to imagine something or that is different from the house, and that they can identify the house because they have a different calibration. So we have a lot of work to do to be able to just see the house and see how we are the house, to then be able to go to this place that we're talking about, imagining something different. And something that we were speaking at the end of the Mountain of Entitlement, when we talked about looking at the cracks and all those feeling of disorientation. So looking at the cracks was a kind of metaphor of looking at this house. So are we gonna build stamina to see the house around us and how we reproduce it? And we talked about this portal to a different way forward that we didn't know what it was. Well, this is what we're talking about here. It's like how we need to first recalibrate ourselves, and then this will allow a different way of being together. And this is in this different way of being together that some things are gonna start to grow differently. And I'm gonna stop there. I think I get passionate sometimes also when I speak about this.
You get a little bit passionate. Yeah. So that is the story of the house. And